waves that lap against the shoreline, or water that holds unimagined wonders. We celebrate green's richness, broad and supple in the leaves of an oak, thin and sharp in the fir tree's needles, soft as moss. We sift fingers through the brown soil, run them over rough tree trunks. For creatures great and small, we are thankful. For woolly bear caterpillars, moles that burrow beneath our feet, one-celled amoebas, grizzly bears and jellyfish, mosquitoes and the bats who eat them. For human creatures too, we are grateful. Friends, family, companions for life's journey. Such a rich, interconnected web is life. We discover this and forget. Remember and forget, until in our forgetting, the earth you made is torn, wounded, bleeding. May tonight feed our remembering, so that we may live on this earth with reverence and awe as your creatures, who are part of your creation. Amen.
Amen. I'll invite now Barb to do a meditation around a tree. You there, Barb? We may have lost her. Hang on.
I'm unmuted now.
Okay.
Okay, they told me how to do that. So we'll start over. Begin by noticing the sensation in your body, and especially note your feet and how they're connected to the ground. Become aware of your breath. With each breath in, allow your focus to go deeper into your being. Invite a tree to come into your mind. It can be a tree that you're aware of. It may be a tree that's in front of you on the screen. And it also may be one that just appears in your mind as you're thinking through this meditation. Observe the tree. Notice as many details as you are able. Is it alone, or is it in a forest? Listen to the sounds that are being made as the wind brushes through the leaves. Now move closer to the tree until you're close enough to merge within the tree. You can either imagine that you are the tree or imagine what the tree feels like. Take your awareness down inside the trunk into the roots. Follow the roots into the ground, noticing how deeply they go. Are there rocks there, or sand, or is it just rich soil? Now, like the tree, allow all that this earth has to offer you flow up into the roots. It may be water or minerals or vital energy from the earth. Allow yourself to be nourished completely, and like the tree, allow this nourishment to flow all the way up the trunk. With each breath, allow the energy to flow higher up the trunk, filling the branches right to the tips of the tree. Feel all of you being nourished by the energy of the earth. From tips of the tree, allow the sun energy to flow in, filling and nourishing the tree. Allow this energy to flow downward this time, right down to the roots. Feel the tree filling with this light until every fine hair of the roots are also filled. You and the tree are now blessed by the sun above and the earth below. You are rooted and grounded and connected to the sun and to the earth. And as you slowly disconnect from the tree, become aware of your own body and notice how you feel. Notice your feet and your arms, and when you're ready, bring yourself back to this present time and look around.
Thank you, Barb. Now I want to share with you a video that show you the trees. Two things I should let you know. I have got a couple texts from people having trouble getting on, but they've come on to the YouTube thing because we're going to the YouTube, which I should have told you when I began too, that this is on YouTube as well. So you know that. So if anybody needs to hide from anybody, turn off your video. So this is a video of our trees and where we're going. So just let me get there and share with sound. Share. Okay. Hey, can you just let me know you can see it and hear it? Wave at me, Kate, if it's going okay. No? Oh, okay.
It's good.
Excellent.
Each blade of grass, every wing that soars, the waves that sweep across a distant shore, make full the circle of God. Each laughing child, every gentle eye, a forest lit beneath a moonbright sky, make full the circle of God. Each silent paw, every rounded stone, the buzz that echoes from a honeyed comb, make full the circle of God. Each vibrant star, every outstretched hand, the wind that leaps and sails across the land, make full the circle of God. each icy peak, every patterned shell, the joyous chorus that the dawn foretells, make full the circle of God. Each cosmic hue, every creature's way, all form the beauty of this vast array, making full the circle of God. Each cosmic hue, every creature's way, all form the beauty of this vast array, making full the circle of God.
Julia.
Hi, everybody can hear me okay? Yes? It's my pleasure to introduce Elizabeth May by reading this introduction. Elizabeth May served as leader of the Green Party of Canada from 2006 to 2019. In 2011, becoming the Green Party of Canada's first elected member of Parliament representing Saanich Gulf Islands. She will continue as Member of Parliament and will run again, now serving as the parliamentary leader of the Green Caucus. In 2005, Elizabeth May was made an Officer of the Order of Canada in recognition of her decades of leadership in the Canadian environmental movement. She graduated from Dalhousie Law School and was admitted to the bar in both Nova Scotia and Ontario. She practiced law in Ottawa with the Public Interest Advocacy Centre prior to becoming Senior Policy Advisor to the Federal Minister of the Environment from 86 to 88. For 17 years, Elizabeth served as Executive Director of the Sierra Club of Canada. A proud mother and grandmother, she lives in Sydney, British Columbia, with her husband, John Kidder. Elizabeth is the author of 8 books, including her most recent, Who We Are, Reflections on My Life and on Canada. Please welcome Elizabeth May.
Thanks,
clapping.
Julia.
You're gonna hear.
Thank you. Well, it's lovely to be with all of you. And I acknowledge the territory I'm on here. I'm in the territory of Wasanich Nation and raise my hands to you. Haishka, Haishka Siam. Should tell you that one of the local chiefs told me that her elders had told her that when we raise our hands like this in this territory, I'm saying Haishka, it's to be the tree branches. So it ties into our themes for this evening. I also want to acknowledge and thank Bill for reflecting on what has occurred and what Cookbee Roseanne Casimir released just a bit more than a week ago of the preliminary results of the findings around the former Kamloops residential school. I think we're all reeling from this and we acknowledge those feelings. And I wanted to share with you, because I don't think it's very widely known, that tomorrow the Shuttlecook Nation and the Stolo, but they've asked for a national day of prayer, which happens just all of us separately where we are. So they've asked that tomorrow on June 6th at 10 a.m., everyone experience stop and pray for all those little souls and their families and all the pain, and knowing that we will find more evidence like that when we look at other schools and other places. So it's a tough time. My own MLA here, who's one of my best friends, Adam Olson, gave a remarkable speech in the BC legislature recently about what it means to know that this really anyone paying attention can't be shocked. And we've known, especially since the report on the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, that this was something we were going to have to look into and keep looking and identify all the children who were taken from their parents but never returned. And there's thousands across Canada that in the records that the Truth and Reconciliation Commission found never came home and parents were never really given, was it TB? Did they die in school? Did they have an accident? No recognition of that. A very tough time. So that the National Day of Mourning that Chief Casimir has asked is for 10 a.m. tomorrow, June 6th, to stop and pray. The other thing that struck me when Reverend Booth, when you were speaking of Trutch, that was part of a speech that Adam gave in Parliament. Adam Olson gave this in the BC legislature, and he specifically mentioned, so I've just got the text over here, that Joseph Trutch, he said, whose name is on a plaque right outside this door, so inside the BC legislature. And he said British Columbia's first lieutenant governor following Confederation is quoted as saying, now this is tough and awful to hear, so I'll warn you, but Adam got these words, managed to say them, quote, I think they are the ugliest and laziest creatures I ever saw, and we should as soon think of being afraid of our dogs as of them. He is famous for what Reverend Booth just told us about, for dispossessing Indigenous people from the lands that they already had as a shrunken reserve area after colonization. So that the creation of reserves, apparently what Trutch looked at was, well, are they occupying the lands? Are they farming the way they're supposed to? So people, of course, the Shuswap territory, Shuswap translate as the spread out people. Being agrarian wasn't on their minds, right? So they just said, okay, well, we're taking that land from you then because we don't think you're using it. It's tough to think back on all of this, but it's something we're called to do. And I think working through it and being aware of the need for mourning and for prayer is really important. But I'm turning now to what you asked me to talk about, which is trees. And I want to thank Barb for the meditation on trees and Kate for the prayer to start us off. By the way, I didn't identify any faith tradition for me. I might as well let you know I'm a practicing Anglican and I'm crazy religious. So I don't know if you knew that when you invited me, but that's what you got. You got someone. So I love all the references to trees that are biblical, right? There's so many. I mean, you can't just pick just one. I mean, foundationally, our creation story is around the tree of knowledge. So we've got a lot of trees going on, but there's, as you know, there's cypresses and there's olive trees and there's fig trees and there's parables. But this is one of my favorite bits of scripture is Isaiah 55. Is what you'll think of right away. For ye shall go out with joy and be led forth with peace. The mountains and the hills shall break forth before you into singing, and all the trees of the field shall clap their hands. Now, I gotta love that because it's really amazing to anthropomorphize a tree. But there's nothing that speaks of greater joy for me than the idea that the trees of the field shall clap their hands. So I've been asked to reflect. By the way, today I'm sure you've known those, but it is World Environment Day. So thank you for inviting me to join you on World Environment Day to raise money to plant more trees between Mission and Abbotsford. I should mention my husband, John Kidder. His name may ring a bell because he was your federal candidate for the Green Party last time around for Mission Massey Fraser Canyon. And he loves his place up in Ashcroft. I've taken a desert guy and I've made him live on the Gulf Islands and the Southern Vancouver Islands. So it's really hardly fair because there's so many trees here. He really would rather be in Abbotsford, but he's stuck with me. So here we are. I was asked to reflect on trees in my own life, a story about trees in my childhood, even that would, and it was a funny exercise, funny, and no one's asked me that ever before. And so I started thinking back on trees in my childhood, and a story came to me that I don't even know if I've ever told my husband this one. But my parents, I grew up in the States. We were in a really rural area, well outside of Hartford, Connecticut. My dad worked in the insurance business. He was an insurance accountant. So we were well outside of any city. We had 7 acres in the countryside. And when I was about 5, my parents decided to expand the house and add another room. And I came out and found that one of my favorite trees, we were surrounded by trees. I was in a wooded area of lovely forest and a lot of variety. We had a lot of deciduous trees. We had amazing variety, that particular belt of, we had, oh my goodness, just gorgeous trees. But one of them was just a regular old birch. You could see it anywhere, but it was a lovely tree. And the workmen who were building the extension on the house had uprooted it, just ripped it out of the ground, and it was thrown onto its side. And so, of course, it was literally uprooted. So its roots were just out. It was, and I came outside and began to weep and wail, apparently. And my mother said to the workers, "Oh, she's not going to stop crying. Just dig any hole and stick it upright." They said, "Well, ma'am, it's not going to live. The roots are all pulled up." She said, "I know, but it'll get us through till tomorrow. Okay, so just dig a hole, stick it in, make it stand upright." Well, that tree, when we left Connecticut, when 14 years or so later, I was 18 when we moved to Cape Breton Island, that tree was still standing and had done a remarkable job being. And my mother used to say, over the years, she said, "That tree shouldn't have lived." I think Elizabeth has a connection to trees. I also did pray for it, because I knew it was going to have a rough time. It thrived. So I wouldn't have thought of that story if it wasn't for you asking me to think about trees in my life. I've had a lot of involvement with forests, particularly because of working with Sierra Club. We did a lot of work to establish the Guayahanas National Park. Now, actually, that was before I was in Sierra Club. I was working with Sierra Club volunteers in British Columbia, but I was actually in the office of the Federal Minister of Environment, 86 to 88, in negotiating what became now Guayahanas National Park, the southern third of the archipelago that we then used to call, I'm sure, looking at the gray hairs on this video with me, we're about the same age. And surely at those days that we called it Queen Charlotte Islands, and now we call it Haida Gwaii, and that national park is Guayahanas. And that was such a campaign. It was one of the things I'm proudest of in my life, was being able to negotiate to stop the logging of those trees. I was just, I'm reaching you here today from Saturna Island, and I was just visiting with my neighbor, Pat Carney. And Pat has this great story of back in the day. She remembers former Premier Bill Vander Zalm saying to Brian Mulroney, "I don't know why you're worried about saving all those trees up there." And he said to the Prime Minister, "Do you know there's trees up there more than 1,000 years old? Those should have been logged long ago." So I know when you hear it, you can almost not believe it. It's like someone saying, I think Ronald Reagan once said, "You've seen one tree, you've seen them all." Well, stopping the logging in Guayahanas and setting aside those remarkable, what we call the Canadian Galapagos, because the Haida Gwaii was a refugia in the last ice age. It has species that are unknown anywhere else in the world because it didn't get under the 10 kilometers of ice that the rest of most of Canada did. It's an amazing area. And I do believe in the power of prayer. And that was a miracle that we stopped that logging. It was Macmillan Blodell. And as we got closer and closer to negotiating a deal, the logging contractor moved to triple shifts so that they could keep cutting 24 hours a day. They were trying to get over the crest of the hill and down in, logging was happening on Lyle Island, which is now fully within the national park. But there was a particularly incredibly beautiful watershed down to a place called Windy Bay. And many of the old giants were in there. And they were trying to go as fast as they could, as hard as they could to get into those trees. And in July, I think it was July 17th, but it may have been July 18th of 1987, we stopped them. And it was just one of those, it was a miracle. I fully accept that we had lots of people working hard, and we had friends of friends of friends of Lily Vander Zalm working on her, and we had friends of friends of friends of every possible thing you could imagine to try to shift the British Columbia government towards saying, okay, a national park is a good idea. And that was, I didn't see those trees until after we'd saved the area. And we went up to Guayahanas for a celebration with the Haida Nation at a big potlatch. And I was with my boss, who was Minister of Environment. And then the next day we went down into what was going to become known as Guayahanas National Park. At that point, I think we just called it the South Moresby Wilderness Proposal. But we had all these anglicized names for everything. But that was one of the peak life experiences for me was walking through this deep, mossy, incredible ancient forest with ancient trees that were just dripping with moss and epiphytic plants and just gorgeous. And of course, salmon bones along the side where some bear had come along and eaten the salmon. So you get the whole sense of how integrated these ecosystems are that we have in British Columbia, how the salmon nourish the forest and the bears, and the forest nourishes the humans and the salmon, and the whole interconnectivity of it is amazing. Of course, you're there along the Fraser River, and what could be more connected to our forests and our salmon than the rivers that run through this province? It's just extraordinary. But as one ecosystem, the British Columbia's forests are tied to everything else. It's certainly up in my husband's neck of the woods, up in Ashcroft. It's just so clear how the poor Bonaparte River and the Thompson are running muddy because the trees aren't there, and the Elephant Hill fire that destroyed those trees. There's still not trees coming back in those areas. Those forests burned, those fires rather, they burned so hot. You probably all know this. They burned off the duff on the top so that the normal process of recovery after a fire, where there'd be some seeds that would take root and you'd begin to get I love the term of volunteers, but to get that for foresters, the volunteers, little trees that spring up. Well, they're not coming back because they just got burned off. And so every time there's a rainfall, it's bringing burnt refuse and just ashy and unhelpful contamination to the river itself, and making it hard for the salmon to be. Salmon need, as we all know, beautiful, clean, burbling over the rocks water. And when you have so much being pulled down over and over again from the dried off, burnt off hillsides, it's a huge issue. So I talk about this kind of stuff a lot with the other, with the ministers in cabinet. And I say to the Liberals who've promised to plant 2 billion trees, well, you should make sure you're citing those in places where you can recover the areas that are flowing into streams and rivers. Wherever there's been a fire, we need to replant, and we need to think about planting. And I'm sure you're doing this, and thinking about the species that are indigenous to the area where we're planting, so that we're not like the forest industry would do, just planting spruce fir everywhere, regardless of what kind of ecosystem they're in, but trying to restore what was there and let it take hold and restore the entire ecosystem around it, including shading the streams so the salmon, with climate change happening everywhere, that the waters of our streams and rivers is heating up, and it makes it very hard for salmon. So we need those trees for shade for the rivers and the salmon, as well as for us, and making sure that we have as many green leafy things taking root as possible. So planting in urban communities makes a big difference. I push really hard for planting in downtown Toronto or downtown Vancouver. We're going to get more and more heat waves, and more people are going to need small spots of shade to stay alive in a heat wave. Our cities create, where there's asphalt. I mean, you can't get anything worse for amplifying a heat effect than concrete and asphalt. We need trees everywhere. And we need trees, as you're doing, in the parks and in the areas where people want to go and restore their souls by just having the sound of a light wind rustling the leaves of a tree, having the chance to sit in the shade. Another thing I love about trees is I've had the luck and fortune of traveling around the world quite a bit, particularly before my daughter was born. So go back before 30 years, because she's about to turn 30. But especially in Latin America, you find that a village is organized around what they call the story tree. And you'll see big shade trees in the middle of communities, whether in Nicaragua, Costa Rica, Mexico. You see these big shady trees and benches all around them. And they do call those the storytelling trees. So the older members of the community can gather the children around and tell them a story, and keep that big shade as part of the quality of life in many village squares all around the world. And I think that's what you're doing. The trees you're planting now are going to be another generation's storytelling trees, where people come and sit around and they're able to experience shade and think about the people who planted the trees. And I hope we have a lot of happy generations of Canadians and that we get climate crisis under control so that our kids do have the kind of world where they can gather under a tree and say, oh, this was planted by our local church. Did you know that? And it was, back in 2021. Can you imagine? So those kinds of things, when you plant a tree, you are thinking long term. No matter what else you're doing, you're thinking about what that tree will mean to other creatures, but also to our own communities 30, 40, 50, 60, 100, 200 years from now. And that's worth embracing. So I didn't want to stop talking about what we're facing with our forests without going very much to Vancouver Island right now. As you know, we have only 2.7% of British Columbia's old growth remaining. And it's 3/4 of it is slated for logging. If there's anything you feel moved to do, to reach out to John Horgan to say, please stop logging in Fairy Creek. It's very concerning that some of the last best old growth is down in those valley bottoms and in the upper Walburn Valley and in Fairy Creek and in the Nakus. And there's a lot of arrests happening, as you probably know. And it's good to express support for saving our old growth. I think I like to think that there's a tipping point in even the most unfeeling politician, especially if it looks like they're getting bad press. But I'd be very grateful for any support to help Fairy Creek. So before opening it up to questions, I just wanted to talk about one other kind of forest that I'm particularly keen to save. And that's a global issue that's well outside of Canada, but it's some of the best forest in the world to concentrate on saving and restoring in terms of our climate. And that's mangrove forests. The mangrove forests of the world have been significantly reduced from two economic pressures: tourism, the desire to have lots of beach resorts and hotels right on the water. And one you might not have thought of that's really worse even than removing mangrove forests for tourism is shrimp aquaculture all around the world. Ecuador, India, Thailand, anywhere where there's that belt of mangroves around the world have been cut down to create ponds for shrimp aquaculture. I know a lot of you will have heard about salmon aquaculture in BC and be preferring to make sure you get the wild salmon. A lot of people who are dead set against farmed salmon don't realize how deadly farmed shrimp are. So this is one thing just to add to the list of ethical choices when you're shopping is if it says product of Thailand for big shrimp, don't buy it. If it's a fancy shrimp ring, unless it says wild caught and sustainable, don't be fooled. These shrimp farms are really devastating. And believe it or not, the mangrove forests also protect coastal villages from big storms. So I don't know if you ever thought about mangrove forests. I'll describe them briefly, but they root in water, right? And their root systems are through the water. They're an incredible nursery for fish. So they sustain a lot of local fishery and local, not huge industrial operations, but local fishermen. And they're also a lot of endangered species live in mangrove forests. Proboscis monkeys are an example, but they're really full of life. They're incredibly good for biodiversity, but they also, of course, as you can imagine, a storm surge or a bad storm, if you hit a huge swath of mangroves before you get to the local village, you protect the community. One of the horrible things that happened, remember that dreadful tsunami of Boxing Day, how many years ago from the earthquake and the tsunami that resulted. The communities that were most wiped out were the ones where the mangrove forests were gone, and the ones that did better surviving were the ones that still had their mangrove forests. But on top of all those reasons, another thing about the shrimp industry is it actually uses human slavery for catching the wild caught fish that are then turned into fish meal and fed to the shrimp. So it's an awful industry. But if we can reverse what's happening to mangroves and replant them, they're a wonderful tree to replant for climate change. You just drop, like it's almost like a spear of green. You just drop it and it takes root. It grows fast. It restores itself, and it sequesters carbon to beat the band. It's a great project, and there's a branch of the United Nations working on bringing back mangrove forests. It's one I just mentioned because if you ever see a possibility for twinning what you're doing in Mission and Abbotsford with somewhere else in the world that's replanting mangrove forests, it's one of my, I have tried to convince the government of Canada to put effort into helping restore mangrove forests, because it can be done so cheaply, it can go so fast. But we've lost more than half of the world's mangroves, so we really need to replant them and restore them. And again, another big advantage in replanting mangroves compared to many other forests around the world is that because they're rooted in water, they don't catch fire if you've got a climate crisis fire event, right? We will be experiencing more fires. We can't help it in all around the world. But mangrove forests are, I'm going to say unique. I may be missing some other species that has as good a chance of surviving, but mangrove forests have a really good chance of being restored and surviving and not catching fire, even when we're looking at significant shifts in climate. I mean, the equatorial zone is the last to be impacted by climate change. We are one of the first. The closer you get to the poles, the more that global warming wallops our ecosystems. And obviously the Arctic is the first for Canada. The rates of warming in the Arctic are 3 times faster than the global rates, and the equatorial zones hardly change at all. So it's a place where we can move in and do some good really fast. So that's more than you wanted to hear about forests from me, I'm pretty sure. And I know you were going to ask some questions, and I think we still have, I'm not quite sure how long you want to hear from me, but I know you wanted to go into breakout rooms, and I want to make sure I haven't messed that up by talking too long. So Julia, thank you very much, and back over to you.
I think Bill is going to organize the going into the breakout rooms, but I just want to mention that your idea of twinning with some place that's taking care of the mangrove forests, that sounds super interesting, and it will be something that I'll be helping talk about in our group later. But I guess Bill will do the groups now.
Yes, so what we're going to do, folks, is, and Elizabeth, that was fine, and you gave us lots to think about, and that's what we were after. So we're going to break into groups. There's about 40 people on, and so if I break it into 6 groups, that's going to be 6 or 7 people in each group. Elizabeth, you and I are not going to go in a group, so when you get invited into a group, just ignore that.
And I'm going to say thank you because I have a paper due I have to turn into somebody. So while you're in groups, I'm going to keep writing, but I'll stick with you till you come back. Okay,
that's fine. And hopefully as we divide this up, I think there's enough of our folks from our group, you'll probably get someone in each group. And if there isn't someone from the Earth Stewards, just jump in, someone jump in. And what we're going to do is, as in our groups, and I'll give you about 10 minutes, is to think about some questions you would like to have Elizabeth discuss with us. And you come back with a couple questions and we'll go through the groups. I don't think we'll have time for 12 questions, but I'm sure that you'll find that other groups are coming up with similar questions. So here you go. There'll be you'll be asked to go into the group, and you can jump in as you wish. 5 or 6 participants per room. Okay, there we go. And that's okay. There we go. And I'll give you 10 minutes. Okay. Good, I can see who's in and who isn't at this point, so. So welcome back, friends. I hope that was useful. And so I'm going to put you on gallery view so I can see as many people as possible. Did you take note? Did you cleverly take note of what your group number was? Some of you did. Oh, excellent. So, all right. I think maybe we'll see. Well, would someone, Elizabeth, are you with us again? You're here?
Yep.
Okay.
Present.
You're not on. Oh, yeah, there you are.
I'm here.
For someone from group one, did you want to offer one of your questions now? I can ask everybody to unmute. Make sure you're allowed to unmute.
I'm not sure what group we are. Oh, we're two. Okay.
Well, until group one can identify themselves, does group two want to ask a question?
Okay, Elizabeth, our question is, where do we find out more about the mangrove forests and the shrimp farming? And are there organizations that are doing this work that we can partner with?
Yes. Now let me just see if I can. I should of course looked it up before I started talking about them. There's the organization that's taking the lead on this is the United Nations. It's called UNESCO. The full name is United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, and it's leading an international effort for restoring mangrove forests. So if you, I'll put it in the chat. Actually, I think I can do that. Can I find? Okay, I think I'll put the website listing. If I can do this, I'm not that technologically astute, but I think here we go to everyone. Let's see, does it happen? Okay, so that's the link to the international organization that's doing the work.
Awesome.
Yeah, and the shrimp issue, oh, it's just dreadful. I had whole campaigns when I was at Sierra Club. We used to call it crimes against crustaceans. That was our short form thing. But the ecological implications of shrimp farming is just outrageous. And we had a wonderful group we worked with in Honduras to try to help them. But here's something that could be useful. Okay, this is a good starting point because it's World Wildlife Fund, and that's a very reliable organization. And it's been so long since I've done the activist work, other than being a nag and talking about it all the time. I actually had a dear friend of mine who's since passed away, who was one of the leading environmentalists from Malaysia. His name is Martin Kaur, and just an amazing fellow. And he lived in Penang, Malaysia, and he came to Canada to meet with the CETA people. This story goes back like 20 years. And he was at a restaurant in Ottawa with someone from CETA, and he turned to the waiter and said, "Are the shrimp in this dish, are these farmed shrimp or are they wild?" And the waiter actually said to him, "Oh, are you a friend of Elizabeth May's? Because she's." so he laughed. He told me, he said, "You must do a lot about making people aware of the issue, because there's just random waiter at a restaurant in Ottawa." So it's like, oh gosh, yes, no, it's farmed. She'll never order our shrimp dishes. And he laughed. He said, "Well," he said, "you must have." Anyway, so but I'm out of touch with the grassroots shrimp movements these days. But I would start with World Wildlife Fund. The link is there. Just awareness raising is a key thing. We have some beautiful shrimp here in Canada, and I've talked to a lot of chefs who are trying to do sustainable seafood. I was talking to a lovely guy, I'm forgetting his name, but he was one of the chefs up at the Wickaninnish Inn, which is high end and expensive. And he said even the clientele that can afford the Wickaninnish Inn would give him a hard time about the price of the shrimp on the menu. And you're saying, you see, we don't want to use the farm shrimp. We're using wild and sustainable. And they said, well, the prices are ridiculous. And so he said he faces a lot of pressure. And so there's an awareness raising piece that any group can do, just to say, if you're ordering shrimp and it's cheap, it's probably not a good thing. It's probably a treat food that every now and then, but not the Costco rings of shrimp for a big potluck and you're going to bring that. No, no, no. So, I mean, I know that a lot of church groups, certainly a lot of church groups have really latched on to ethical, fair trade, organic coffee for coffee hour. Just add this to the kind of list of, you know, how do we make people more aware of this? And so those are just some leads.
That's a great suggestion about compiling a list.
In our group, there was a couple. He is from his family is from the coast of India, in one of the villages that is bordered by a mangrove forest, and they have a link or a connection to a local preservation group, which
that's
they
wonderful.
said they will give the info. They'll send it to you, Kate, at Gladwin.
Okay, great.
That's it. That's usually India. This, by the way, the Supreme Court of India banned shrimp farming. It's such a bad impact. I don't know if any of you have heard of Vandana Shiva, but she's one of the leading environmentalists of India. And she told me once that she said, no other industry that's hit India has had the devastating effect of shrimp farming. So the Indian Supreme Court banned it, but it's just if you, by the way, Vietnam has made a big effort to do sustainable shrimp farming. So if you see a product label that says made in Vietnam and farmed and sustainable, I kind of believe them because I know Vietnam decided early on to try to brand themselves as a place that was the opposite of Thailand. I mean, in Thailand, they call it pink gold. And in places in Thailand, in India, in Bangladesh, a lot of conservationists fighting shrimp farming have been murdered. It's because it's so easy to make big money. It's just it's one of the more hideous undersides of our lovely cheap lifestyle of all you can eat shrimp at Red Lobster. It's just no.
Yeah. Right.
So thank you. I'm not worried about how much time the questions take because whatever questions are asked are the questions that need to be asked.
So, I can give shorter answers, although many of my friends will disagree.
Don't worry about it. Group 3, did you have a question you wanted to throw out there?
Yes, I think that's us. I want to bring it back to BC. I'm very distressed about the old growth logging that's going to happen in Fairy Creek. And I've written letters to the Premier. I've left phone messages. How do we convince politicians here in BC that the old growth forest is more valuable than some of the forestry jobs?
Yeah, it's a great question. And the reality is that Teal Jones, the company logging in Fairy Creek, has said that their profits expected are $10 million. Well, surely the BC government could, I mean, I went through these negotiations, by the way, as I was mentioning, with Macmillan Bloedel for the Giants in Haida Gwaii. We paid more than $10 million to buy out Macmillan Bloedel, and that was in 1987. I mean, this should not be hard. So I think phone calls to British Columbia MLAs, members of the cabinet, letters to the editor really will matter, especially as they begin to hear from people who aren't just on Vancouver Island, to say, look, this is just, you know, the BC government right before the election claimed they had an old growth policy and an old growth strategy and they would stop logging the old growth, but they're logging hard, and it's like, how do you convince any government? I had no idea John Horgan would be I didn't know he could be so awful, but they need to realize they're in trouble right across the province. So letters to Vancouver Sun, letters to the Victoria Times Colonist, mainstream papers to just say, you know, if, you know, I want to go to Fairy Creek and get arrested, except that I haven't had my vaccinations, I'm in COVID, I'm, you know, whatever you personally feel in your heart, or I want to know, by the way, the name of the group, I'll look up their website while we're talking, that's organizing all this, and they do ask for donations. They are very grassroots, and I'm impressed with the work they're doing. So I'll just see if I can find a link that they're absolutely nonviolent. And this is their website. I'm going to put in the chat next. And maybe you can find ways to ask them, what can we do to help you? They do take financial donations online, but I think convincing Horgan will take him hearing from people who live in Abbotsford, and he'll assume that it's just a few of us, Greens on Vancouver Island. The more letters to the editor, the better. And thank you for phoning his office, and thank you for caring.
Thank you, Elizabeth.
So group 4, if you know who you are.
Yes, we know who we are. I think I want to take the opposite point of view. We talked a bit in our group about the fact that Teal, the company, is not logging in the lower part of the Fairy Creek watershed. They have no intention of logging there. What they are logging is a small tree farm license up the hillside on the one end of that estuary. Anyway, and we also know that the pictures and the propaganda that group is sending out is not quite accurate. So I would urge people to try other sources and find out what's going on. For instance, that picture of the log on the back of the truck, the old great huge log on the back of the truck, that's a log that was been stored in a mill in Coquitlam for a long time. It has nothing to do with the old growth forest that's over there on the island. So, and I think we need to understand that the tropical forests are not subject to the kind of forest management that we have enjoyed for some 60 years here in British Columbia. We live in this paradise largely because of the profits and the way in which the forests have been managed. Not always, that's true. And so I just want to make that statement. But the question we've been studying a book in which, Elizabeth, you are quoted by Carol Kilby in Evolutionary Dancer. Have you heard of that book? Well, anyway, it's a great book. And she quotes you, I think you had something to do with the Global Earth Charter. And
I was one of the commissioners on the Earth Charter when it was co-chaired, believe it or not, by Mikhail Gorbachev and Maurice Strong. So it was an amazing honor there, yeah.
And this is the quote. She says, you're quoted saying, "This is a time of peril and of promise." And I think we're all very much aware of the peril, but I wonder if you would comment on the promise.
Okay. Well, first, I just comment quickly that I completely agree that the photo of the log, there was an assumption that somehow that had to do with logging in Fairy Creek. And that's unfortunate because, of course, as you say, it wasn't. But I did put in the chat here the BC government's assessment on strategic protection of old growth, and the foresters who were involved in that, and some of them are speaking out now, are very concerned because the activities that are going on do threaten old growth. So I won't dive into that because I want to answer your question, but I just put the government website there. There were supposed to be a whole bunch of steps taken to halt logging of old growth. And some of the places where Teal Jones wants to put roads and some of the logging activities that they're planning, I don't want to get too big to do about that, but there's some areas they don't plan to log, but other areas where there are large trees.
Okay,
and old growth.
thank you.
So yep. I'll just put that. Now, in terms of the promise, my goodness, I really love the Earth Charter. It was an amazing experience to be part of working on that. I mean, there were millions of people around the world who participated in it. I don't know how many of you have heard of the Earth Charter, but the early effort was to have it ready for the Earth Summit in 1992. It failed to be ready then. By the way, a lot of faith community groups participated. And after we didn't get it done for 92, Mikhail Gorbachev and Maurice Strong decided a different approach, and they had a lot of people involved. And they put together a panel of about maybe 24 to 30 of us. I'm losing track, but quite a few faith leaders were involved in that, including an amazing theologian from Brazil named Leonardo Boff, who was an early liberation theologist who became a creation theologist. And there's a lot of creation theology out there. Of course, Father Thomas Berry and his writings are very much associated with the notion of understanding and thinking of the planet, thinking of creation as something in which we can play a co-creator role in an ever-evolving Gaia. I mean, this is not to say for 1 minute that these theologists have started worshiping nature instead of God. It's very easy to get attacked on this stuff as though we're losing track of creation as the work of God's hands and therefore sacred. And therefore we ought to be able to figure out how do we obviously use resources, but protect the integrity of ecosystems. So the Earth Charter, the promise, the peril is it's like falling off the edge of a cliff and with no place to land. Where we are in terms of the climate crisis is so much worse now than when we signed off on the Earth Charter at an event called Rio +5 in 1997. And signing off on the Earth Charter and circulating it for people to think about. It's embedded in principles of nonviolence, embedded in principles of sustainability, that we can't, in the industrialized world, stop people in the global south from their own path to development so they can get out of poverty. I mean, there's a lot of richness to the document, and a lot of it was informed by, oh my goodness, it's such a cross-cultural process, so interesting. I loved that work. So the promise is really understanding that we collectively can set a different course, that we can collectively, as a human family of Homo sapiens, that recognize we have a responsibility for all the other species with whom we share this planet, that we can make a change. And that's the promise.
Thank you.
I think group 5. Someone from group 5, you know who you are? I saw someone.
I can ask a question for group 5 unless Kate wants to and was prepared to.
No, go ahead.
Elizabeth, what do you think the proper role of public education is with respect to the environment?
Well, it's critical, but I also have to say I'm very mindful of the peril of thinking, oh, these beautiful young children, they'll do all the right things, because their chance of a livable world will end before they get to vote, unless we do the job. So I think it falls on a combination of grandparents and grandchildren. There may be that their parents are too busy with work right now to look at the big picture. I mean, I think it really is elders and the babies. It happens that my own daughter has just started out as an elementary school teacher. She just finished teachers college during COVID, but she's also working on her PhD. So I've got a bit of an insight into what kids are learning in school these days. It's pretty amazing how many curriculum changes there are, so that young people are quite aware of the choices we make and how they affect the environment, in a way that's hopeful and gives young people the sense of agency, that they're not just facing something scary. There's good kinds of education, and I think some that is really quite poor, but I've been impressed with what my daughter shared about what she's experiencing as a school teacher in the elementary schools of Burnaby. But again, we have to bear in mind that public education is essential. I think primarily we have to make sure, because I think what happened in the United States with people being prepared to believe absolute nonsense, like this QAnon theory and all this kind of crazy stuff, decent, strong public education that teaches critical thinking and analytical skills to be able to look at a website and say, well, this isn't real stuff. This is all invented nonsense. It's a difficult time for people to discern what's a good source of information and what isn't. And our public school system in Canada is way better than the quite starved for funding education system in the US. I hope Joe Biden will succeed in restoring a lot of the social safety net and strong public education in the US. Education should never, and I'm very worried about post-secondary education as well. I think the Laurentian University bankruptcy is a tip of an iceberg for our failure to keep post-secondary education well-funded. Anyway, it's kind of a rant, Harold. I would be I think it's critical that we have good environmental education, but don't make that leap, which is easy to do, of saying, oh, well, the kids will do a better job than we've done. We have to do the work that they need us to do while we're still alive as hard as we can.
Mm-hmm. Group 6, was there a group 6? I think there was.
Oh, there's Tim. I didn't notice Tim.
Hi, thanks, Bill, and thanks, Elizabeth, for answering our questions. Really appreciate that. So I took our group on a little bit of a tangent in that I volunteer for a group. It's called the Blue Dot, and it's a subgroup of the David Suzuki Foundation. They've been working for years to try and get environmental rights in legislation or the charter, ultimately the charter. And there's been some good news in the last few weeks, I guess, that the current Liberal government has introduced amendments to the Canadian Environmental Protection Act, and that those amendments have a few articles that would introduce key elements regarding environmental rights. And so my question is whether you were aware of these amendments to Bill C-28, and how you could advise, perhaps from your experience, our group area could work towards supporting that to ensure that those rights go through, or that bill goes through. It's got a long ways to go. It's only been introduced.
Yeah.
And particularly given our area, which, as I'm sure you know, is very conservative. Abbotsford Mission is both conservative. We don't have a member in Parliament representing us. So that's the greatest frustration I have, as a Blue Dot, and also working here, is just the lack of support federally, locally here to do that. So thank you.
Absolutely. Well, the Bill C-28, Amendments to the Canadian Environment Protection Act, is in need of really significant improvements. It doesn't actually create the right to a healthy environment. It creates, in a preamble, that we should have the right to a healthy environment. And then it says we're going to have a 5-year period where we develop, it's very strange language, an architecture or a framework to get to the right to a healthy environment. If any of you have seen, the Blue Dot work has been so influential, and the Standing Committee on Environment and Sustainable Development recommended the creation of the right to a healthy environment back in a report that they issued back, I think, in 2017. So hopes were high that this bill would actually deliver on it. But as we said it, and you're clearly aware of it, it was just in for first reading a couple weeks ago. I will be able to put in amendments, but I don't think it's even going to get back for second reading before we adjourn for the summer. And then we don't know if this is the perennial question, are we going to be in an election? I always say to people, well, we have a fixed election date law, and the next election we know is October 2023. But, other prime ministers have violated the fixed election date law without any penalties. And certainly John Horgan and the Premier of New Brunswick, Blaine Higgs, took the advantage of a snap election in pandemic to turn their minority into a majority. So who knows when we're going to have an election, but please do keep your eye on this, on the improvements that we'll be advancing whenever the bill gets back to committee. It needs to be really beefed up, and there are the groups that work on these issues I think they have the same view I do, that the way it's currently drafted is not even really creating the right, and not even creating the possibility of the right, but trying to make it look like they did. So it needs a lot of work. Mm-hmm. But again, I'd say Brad Viss and I work together a lot, believe it or not. Ed Fast, on certain issues, sometimes I certainly like them. So please don't rule out trying to get them on board. You just never know. It's almost hopeless, I'd give you that. But Brad Viss and I work together a lot, for instance, on trying to get the sewer pipe below Mission fixed so that there's not a risk of the sewer pipe breaking in the Fraser River and all of that. So there's certain issues, and Ed and Brad have both been really good on salmon issues, honestly. So you never know. I always give it the old college try, as they say.
Thank you. So now that all the other groups have asked a question, group 1 should know who you are. Do you have a quick question, group 1? So maybe there wasn't a group one.
I think, yes, we are. I don't know what happened to Kathleen, but one of our questions was asked anyway. But we did want to also ask Elizabeth. It's such a complex issue at Fairy Creek because we understand that not all Indigenous groups support the protesters, and I wondered how you would suggest that that kind of dichotomy can be handled.
Yes, well, it's a very complex issue indeed, and I'm going to just find another thing to stick in the chat that will help. One thing is that the Packagee First Nation has entered into agreements with the government that require that they defend the logging, even if they don't really want to. So one of the elders is very involved, is Bill Jones, who's calling for the logging to stop. I'm just trying to find the right thing to put in the chat here for you. But the agreement that was negotiated with them is quite, well, when you read it, it's quite heavy duty, patronizing and colonial. So my MLA, who is Adam Olson, who's Sartlip First Nation, has written how he felt about it when he discovered it. So it's just, this is a fairly recent post that Adam made, and it really helps explain how hard it is for a First Nation that's not really given options. This is what you're going to do for resource development. Sign this agreement, and well, you'll read it. It's. I find it quite distressing to think that an agreement this controlling and patronizing would be negotiated and signed in 2021 after we have the commitment to the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. So it is complicated. My First Nations friends who are involved in protesting say, look, all we can say is we stand with the trees. We won't go wrong if we're standing with the trees, because it's the last of the old growth and we want to protect it. But do it respectfully. And of course, the groups are nonviolent, and we're trying to get John Horgan to make sure that the old growth is protected, because that was his campaign promise.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So, thank you, Elizabeth. So, friends, we've gone through all the groups with at least one question. Is there another burning question that any of the groups didn't get to share, then we'd like to? Is there a question some individual has that you didn't talk about in the group, but now you want a chance to jump in?
Here's another question from Group 5.
5, okay.
What do you think Canada's role should be with respect to, the Global Climate Accord?
Well, we should be in the lead, but we're the laggard of the pack in terms of industrialized countries. So I've been way too many climate negotiations. I hate to tell you all that I've been working on the climate issue since 1986, when I was working with the Federal Minister of Environment. In that same era when we were working to save Guayahanas, that's when I would learn my climate science from the Environment Canada scientists. And I would have bet you anything that by this point we would have solved the problem, because we were on it. We understood the science. We'd just gotten through saving the ozone layer, which is no small thing. Canada was in the lead there. We'd sorted out acid rain, and on this issue, we've been we're the worst. We have the worst record in the industrialized world. Now, we did a good job in negotiating at Paris. That was the 21st conference of the parties that took place under the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. And when I say we did a good job, Catherine McKenna, who was our Minister of Environment, she'd been Minister of Environment for like a couple weeks when she went off to this negotiation. But the goals of the Paris Agreement are to hold, this is a very complicated concept, and it takes all these words to say it accurately, so forgive me, is to hold global average temperature to as far below 2 degrees as possible, and preferably to 1.5 degrees, as compared to what the global average temperature was at the Industrial Revolution. So that basically is trying to hang on to a livable world. And I know that 1.5 or 2 degrees doesn't sound like anything in a country where we can go through many Canadians certainly can have minus 30 in the winter, plus 30 in the summer. What's 2 degrees? But remember when I was talking about the ice age refugia, back in the last ice age, the difference in terms of global average temperature between then and now is only 5 degrees. So a 2-degree change, we are already committed. We've already changed our global average temperature by 1 degree more than it was before the Industrial Revolution. 1.5 is on the science about as risky as you want to get if you want to ensure a livable world, which is to say, avoid hundreds of millions of people every single year being made refugees because they can't live where they were. The sea level rise or persistent drought or storms or what have you. So this is all what we agreed to do in Paris, is hold the global average temperature of as far below 2 degrees as possible, preferably 1.5. And when I say Catherine McKenna did a great job, we were the first country that from the industrialized world that agreed with the developing world that we had to hold to 1.5, not merely say 2. 2 degrees. Now, the more science we get, the more we realize that 1.5 degrees is not a safe zone. It's still a gamble on the future. 2 degrees is more dangerous. Anything above 2, we don't know at what point the planet becomes uninhabitable, but anything above 2 is pretty darn dangerous. Right now, we're on track globally for 3 degrees because all the promises all the countries in the world have made, even if all of the countries in the world absolutely kept the promises they've made, it's not enough to hold to below 2, and preferably to hold to 1.5. So Canada's role, I can tell you, I remain very disappointed. I keep looking for the Liberals to do the right thing. Joe Biden is really impressive, and I'm surprised because I wasn't expecting him to be that good. And when he appointed John Kerry, he didn't put John Kerry in an environment role. He made him his national security advisor and climate envoy out of his National Security Council. So this is a very different framing than Justin Trudeau and Jonathan Wilkinson are doing. They're still talking about climate as an environmental issue. And we really need to make this shift that says, no, this is a national security threat. And it requires a whole of government approach. It's not a pollution issue. I mean, it involves pollution. I started to say that climate change is an environmental issue, the way drowning is a water problem. I mean, water is involved, but that's not the top of mind issue if you can't get a breath, right? So this needs a lot more focus, a lot more science understanding, and the government, again, needs more pressure. Joe Biden and John Kerry organized the Earth Day Summit to get 40 heads of government from around the world to commit to higher targets. The US is now committed to 50% below 2005 levels by 2030, and Canada is committed to 40. So I know that there was a lot of arm twisting. Biden and Kerry really, at one point I know they told Trudeau that he wouldn't be invited if the best he was going to offer was the target he had, which was at that point 32%. I mean, I know all these numbers go by in a days, but the reality is we're not on track with what the science tells us we have to do. The UK so far, all the EU countries so miles ahead of us. I'll do one graph with my hands and then I'll leave you. If this is 1990, when we pledged we were going to reduce emissions at the Earth Summit 1990 levels. Right now, all of the EU is 44% below 1990 levels. The Germany, 40%, the UK is now pledged to get 78% below 1990 levels by 2035. Like that's below my screen, right? The US is 3.7% above 1990. Canada is 21% above 1990. We're in a different graph and a different picture. And it's just so unfortunate because we could be doing so much better, but we keep shifting the targets and making them farther away. And the politician who makes the promise, like Stephen Harper made a promise in 2015 in Copenhagen, no, 2009. Stephen Harper made the promise, obviously, in 2009 in Copenhagen at COP15. See, I said 20, to cut our emissions by 18% below 2005 levels by 2020. But we always go up. It's not just we don't hit the target. We say we're going to reduce emissions by this much, and then our emissions go up. They keep going up. So it's not just that we don't hit the target. We're actually in the wrong direction all the time. Since Trudeau became prime minister, emissions have gone up. Fossil fuel subsidies have gone up. I said to them in a question I asked in question period, I'm surprised that the minister doesn't have vertigo from the astonishing directional confusion which he suffers, because we're not going down, we're going up. So anyway, I try to be nice to them because I generally love them. I think it's important to love the people I work with at work. But I think they need a bit of tough love because they're lying to us. Sad to say. So I should go. Sorry, I should leave you guys. What, Julia? Sorry.
Sorry. I am officially, I think, Bill, did you want to mention something, or did you get to talk to Elizabeth earlier?
Yes, you did.
Okay, perfect. Well,
I don't want you to pay me anything. I want you to throw it in the kitty to plant more trees.
All right. Thank you so much. Anyway, I just want to say that the Earth Charter, I'm well aware of it. In fact, I made a speech at their center in Costa Rica.
Oh, how wonderful.
It was, I can't even tell you the funny story of how I ended up doing that, but the gist of my talk was that profit at any cost capitalism is the root of all evil that is destroying the world environment. And I don't think they were really, they weren't waiting for that speech that day. It was kind of, but anyway, beyond that, also the notion of the commons. I think that notion of the commons really needs to be expanded to include much more of the earth, the waters, the trees. All of this is the commons, really, and how groundwater is being purchased by Nestle and different, although I know that situation's getting better, but there's so much to be done. I guess what I just want to ask you is, how do you not lose hope?
I think it must be the drugs. That's just my silly answer. I don't take anything. I like to sometimes say that because it's just, people ask me all the time, how do you, no, it's faith, it's prayer, it's Ephesians 3:20. Ephesians 3:20 is my go-to, that God's power working in us can do infinitely more than we can ask or imagine. Now that's a powerful lot of power. It's one thing that God can do infinitely more than we can ask. God's power working in us, right? So it's not external. God's power working in us can do infinitely more than we can ask or even imagine. So I figure we'll be all right, as long as we don't sit back and think somebody else is going to handle it for us. So occasionally get discouraged for sure. But I know despair and apathy are basically evil twins. And you're no better off to know a lot about it and decide you give up than to not care to learn about it. And we can't afford apathy or despair. We need to really encourage each other and embrace the power of love, because that's all that we can count on, and it is infinitely renewable. So I put the Earth Charter in the link there because I love the document. And a little known fact, the Green Party all around the world, the global Greens, when we finally got together, and I wasn't at the first meeting, and the Greens have existed over 40 years in different countries around the world. But the first time everybody got together and said, okay, do we as Green parties in Germany and New Zealand and all around the world, do we have shared values? What would they be? And it was a meeting in Canberra, Australia, and they're derived, the 6 core green values are derived from the Earth Charter. So there I'd been involved with the Earth Charter, but wasn't at the Green Party. And then I got involved in the Green Party and said, well, these values, I know these values. And then I realized, this Professor Brendan Mackey, who was with us on the Earth Charter Commission, fed all this into the Greens when they met in Australia. Isn't that interesting? So it's one of those small world things, really, that is, I find, look, what a world we live in. We're in an incredibly beautiful biosphere. And those of us in Canada, despite our failures and gaps and tragedies, and in spite of residential schools and everything else, to live in Canada is to be truly blessed.
Agreed.
So we have to do 10 times more than the people who, if they take, as I mentioned, the activists against shrimp farming in Bangladesh and India and places where they were murdered. We do all this work, and the worst thing that might happen to us is that one of our neighbors gets annoyed and stops speaking to us, right? That's like the big, I mean, if we're able to do it, we should do it.
So thank you. We have come close to our time. Julie, did you do your thank you?
I'm doing it now.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. It's been such a pleasure to hear you speak, and I could listen all night. But anyway, we better call it a night at this point. Go ahead, Bill. Thank you again.
I just want to thank you, Elizabeth. You can stay to the end. We'll have one more song if you wish, or you can go finish your
But I
word.
have to say, I love speaking to people of faith, and that's why I accepted the invitation, because it was identified that your work is from United Church in Mission in Abbotsford, and when you're in politics, you're not supposed to talk about religion or faith, and I appreciate the opportunity to be an out of the closet Christian with you. So thank you very, very much.
Yeah, welcome. Thank you for being with us. So friends, just 2 pieces left on our evening. One, fairly quick. If you want to make a donation to our tree planting project, you can just go to the Trinity Memorial website, click on the donation, and that'll take you to the Canada Helps page. And then you just need to make sure, let me show you here. Oh, that's not what I wanted to do. Hang on. You just need to make sure, I'm just going to show you what it looks like. Right there. As you can see there, I'll just get the pointer back here. It'll come up here and you can put in the amount, but make sure you put tree project here in the message so we know that it's for the tree. And then it'll be collected and allotted to the fund collected for the trees. You'll get a tax receipt, a charity receipt for through our church from that, well, straight from Canada Helps actually. And on top of that, we'll let you know when we have what we've collected over the summer, and we'll talk to the city and get ready to plant. So it's simple, it's there. You'll find it in our website. We've got donate this way, donation information, and it takes you to Canada Help. Or you can send it in to our church address. Our final piece on this, I'll let you know, the chat and all the links in there will get saved, and I'll put that information on our, I'll make that available to the group, and I'll put it on the website so you can find those links if you wish, as sort of a news item about that. You'll find it, search when you get on our website. And then I want to share with you our wrap-up song. If I can figure out where I put it now. It's disappeared. Oh, here it is. And this is a song Julia wrote, and it's on a video with a montage of photos from our tree planting. And then
No, it's not the tree planting. It's actually a montage of photos that were contributed by many, many people who sent me photographs of trees that were, and I just made a little slideshow and put my song over that.
So some of them are the tree planting, but not all of them.
Yeah.
Okay, so and then we'll say goodnight and blessings on you all, and thank you for your passion for saving creation, if I may be so bold.
Good night, everyone.
And I come over here and.
A century ago, on some hard scrabble land, stood a white clapboard house, a woman, a man. They raised a family, 2 girls, 7 boys. boy, roots run deep. Under your feet, roots run deep. Even while you sleep, reaching for love and seeking connection. In the yard, the man planted a row of young trees, a maple for every baby that survived to age 3. And the trees gave them shade on hot summer days. In autumn, their branches seemed to burst into flame. Roots run deep. Under your feet, roots run deep. Even while you sleep, reaching for love and seeking connection. One maple stands on that hillside today. The old homestead's gone, the family long in their graves. A lightning-struck relic, the gnarled old tree. She's still filled with birdsong and sheltering leaves. Roots run deep. Under your feet, roots run deep. Even while you sleep, reaching for love and seeking connection. I don't know what all that hissing was about. Did other people hear a lot of hissing? No? Oh, good. I'm so glad.
It's all
I
good.
just heard a lot of hissing. Okay, great. Thanks, Elizabeth. Thank you very much once again. Yes. Blessings
That
on
was
you
beautiful,
and
Julia.
your work.
Lovely.
Okay.
Thank you, friends, and make your donations, and we'll plant trees. Tell your friends to send money to plant trees, and if you're going to fly across the country to make amends for the carbon used. You know, in honor of your friends, we'll make a list and keep the list on a banner on the website. So if you want to do that, you can do that too. And we will plant trees, and there will be a forest.
Yay. Okay. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for being here.
Okay.